post-racial society would be. And so I came up with this definition. You can use this if you want to. It'd be good if you put my name in at the bottom of it, but it is a society where people do what? Where they notice race. None of this stuff about being a colorblind society or not seeing race. You do see race. So we notice it, but no one is punished because of it. So that's the first part. The second part would be this, and I think this is equally important. This is equally important, where social inequality is near equally distributed. In other words, when I go and look at the bad things in society, people in prisons and whatever else, that pretty much looks like the rest of the society looks. If you knew nothing about the United States, you would know that's not the case. So that's just my definition of what a post-racial society would look like. And I asked myself, why are people claiming we live in a post-racial society? Well, number one, when you drive down the streets now, you don't see whites-only signs or no colored or whatever. And the fact that those were removed, a lot of people think, okay, that's got to be evidence. Also, we don't see, many of us, widespread evidence of discrimination and prejudice in our own everyday working lives. Some of us personally have made commitments to not be racist, to not be prejudiced. And so we think to ourselves, then, it must be the case that no one is like that. But I think if you look at that fourth bullet, I think many Americans just are tired of talking about race. I'm not talking about liberals or conservatives. They're just tired of talking about it. And when I travel around the country giving presentations, usually at the end, I'll have someone raise their hand in the question and answer session, and they'll say something like, if you just stop traveling around the country talking about race, racism will go away. That doesn't even make stupid sense. The reality is, we talk about race all the time. We talk about it at our dinner tables. We talk about it in corridors. We talk about it in the restrooms. But we don't often talk about it in places where our ideas are challenged. And then the final thing, and I'll go through this really quickly. I thought I had much more time, so I was going to do this whole elaborate thing. It's not going to be nearly as impressive as it would have been. No, I'm serious. It's not going to be nearly as impressive. So I think the other reason people believe this post-racial thing is because they've seen things happen in the culture. And I'll give you a couple examples here. One is, when I was a little boy growing up in Mobile, Alabama, which is the most progressive city in America. Okay, I know you're lawyers, but you got to have a sense of humor in some way. I would come running home. People would come screaming outside that there's a black person on TV. I was a little boy, like 9, 10 years old, and they would be screaming, there's a black person. And they didn't mean Hattie McDaniel in Gone with the Wind, or the character Beulah, or Rochester in, what's Rochester was in Jack Benny's show. They didn't mean Mammies and Sambos and Toms. They meant like Bill Cosby, an Ivy League educated person who was a spy. Now, I watched this show recently because it's on one of those, retro channels, and it's really silly. But at the time, I mean, it was great to have a black character, all right? In terms of Julia, the first woman I was in love with. And I'm not sure what Alabama state laws would have been given my status as a child, but probably it would have been, I don't know, it's Alabama. So the point is as a 10-year-old, I was in love with Julia. And she was, if you remember, a nurse. She was single, but her husband had been killed in the Vietnam War. That was the way she could have a husband, and yet Americans didn't have to deal with the issue of black sexuality and black sensuality and stuff. But here's the point. If today, for example, you had one day in the U.S. history, one day, this day, where you took all the blacks off TV the way it was then, it would shock people, it would stun people. And I started just looking at, I just literally started looking at TV for black people. And the only other time I've done that, I'm on a lot of white supremacy websites, and it's an interesting worldview on white supremacy websites. And one of the things that white supremacists complain about is that the idiot now in commercials is always white. That the black person is explaining that, no, you can't believe everything you read on the internet, and it's the black person that's explaining that you have to have Carfax. Carfax is full of crap, by the way. That's libel or slander. But anyway, it's true. So they're complaining that there's too many blacks, and that the blacks are, they've not only taken over television, but that they have become the intelligent people on TV. But my point is this. There was a time in America when there were just no blacks on TV in these kind of roles. I mean, almost zero. And now we just take that for granted. So a person looking at that could think, we've entered a what? post-racial society. I think about Jackie Robinson, and now, how many of you have seen 42? No one. Okay, good. Will they show that in Big Rapids? All right, so, all right. Okay. Oh, yeah, I went there. All right, so anyway, I'm the Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion. I get to say things. I'm not your usual administrator like Scott was here. So, anyway, if you go see Jackie, it's funny when people go see Jackie Robinson, and then they come to me and they go, oh, you should go see Jackie Robinson. They start telling me the story of Jackie Robinson. I grew up in Mobile, where it was against the law to root for any team other than the Dodgers if you were black, because they loved the Dodgers because of what? Jackie Robinson. Okay, and it only became okay to watch the Braves when Hank Aaron, who was from Mobile, went to play for the Braves. But anyway, a couple things about Jackie Robinson. If you go back to that day, again, are we in a post-racial society? It's all relative. At the time he was coming up, or just before then, the dominant view in American society was that blacks were inferior athletes innately, that they were born inferior athletes, that they could never compete with white athletes, okay, couldn't say the word either, all right, that they could not compete with them. Now, you don't hear that song sung much anymore, but go then to this period, and I was telling Franklin this, I played baseball my whole life, and up until the last several years, still played against the colleges, Michigan State, Calvin, all these in the summertime, until I couldn't see the rotation on the slider. But I never paid attention to this, even though I owned a baseball card store for years, sold baseball memorabilia, coached baseball, lost a doubleheader last night with my 14U travel team. I never knew something. They didn't wear helmets. I just never paid attention. And then several years ago, I was just looking at it, and I was like, he doesn't have on a helmet. Why is that significant? They're throwing at him. I mean, I got kids who are afraid to bat with the helmet. I know people that wouldn't stand in a batting box, a major league batting box, without a helmet, right? You would be horrified if someone walked up to the face Verlander or somebody without a helmet. Every time he went to bat, he didn't wear a helmet. None of them wore helmets. And so they were literally throwing at his head. So, are we a post-racial society? Well, look at where we are today. I mean, now, sports, which make heroes of these people. I mean, just like we do with entertainers, we make heroes of them. Now, the ascendancy of the African-American and African descent athlete is just incredible. Just look back. Babe Ruth never played against black ball players in a regular game. He played against Satchel Paige and all of them in travel exhibition games, but never played against them. The NBA didn't have black ball players until shortly after Jackie Robinson. And if you're Larry Doby, people are like, oh, the other one, the guy the first black in the American League. But I mean, if you go back, we didn't have, now look around. It's just absolutely incredible. Oh, by the way, in case you're wondering, this right here, that's Archie Griffin, and that's me. And that was me getting an award from the Ohio State University. And you can laugh all you want. Go green and take blue with you. But the thing I said that night, Scott, it was funny. I said, as we were taking the picture, I said to the audience, between the two of us, we have 2 Heisman trophies. And okay, if you're a Michigan fan, that won't make sense to you because you can't put 2 Heisman trophies in one. Get it? You see what I'm saying? All right. So, all right, now, if you're a sociologist, I'm going as fast as I can, and but if you're a sociologist, you would think a better measure of racial progress would actually be interracial marriages, because so many other barriers have to be covered before that's possible. Does that make sense? Not interracial sex, interracial marriage. In other words, you have to agree that minorities can live in your culture. You have to agree that it's okay, as a society, for them to work at the same place, live in the same communities and the like. And that's like one of the last barriers to marriage. And before 1967, it was still illegal in more than a dozen states for African Americans, for example, to marry whites. Of course, now if you go back before that, and it wasn't just African Americans, by the way, also wasn't just black Americans, yellow Americans, red Americans, brown Americans not allowed to marry white Americans. Look at the Chinese. I could tell you a story about when they got here in the 1880s. They weren't allowed to marry or have sex with anybody who was not Chinese, and we did not allow Chinese women into the culture. And we actually created a term called mutilated marriages because they weren't allowed to bring their marriage partners from China. And so they could be with no one except men with men, or use drugs or whatever. And so if you see some of the stereotypes that we have of Asian American men, in this case Chinese American men, come from that period. But anyway, in 1967, in the case of Lovings versus Virginia, which of course you all know, the Supreme Court ruled that the anti-miscegenation laws were unconstitutional. Now look today. I mean, there's still barriers here, but it's nowhere. I mean, only 1 in 10 people in this 2012 Pew Research said that it was bad for the country. That is, go back 20 years ago, 30 years ago. That would not have been what people would have said. You know? And then if you look at the fact that we now have almost 5 million interracial marriages today, to the point where now, again, go back 30 years ago, you know, you still have people with their preferences and still people with their prejudices, but it's not a scandal. It's not a stigma attached to it, you know? So, someone looking at that might say we're living in a what? Hello?
Postracial.
There you go. Tough crowd. And then, of course, hell froze over on, you know, when I was little, the old people would say, you know, hell will freeze over if whatever happens. If a black person is elected president of the United States, hell will freeze over. So hell froze over on that day. And that was also around the time we start hearing a number of groups say, like, for example, gay Americans start saying, right at the same time, that gay is the new what? Black. And other people start saying we've now moved into a post-racial society. But again, if you go back to my definition of what a post-racial society would mean, it wouldn't just mean that a mixed-race, black-identified person could be elected president of the United States. It means that no one, that we as a society have gotten to the point where no one is punished for their racial membership, no one, and where the goodies are distributed relatively equally, and the baddies are distributed. Does that make sense? All right, so really quickly, this poll right here from 2012 actually demonstrated that there were more anti-black and anti-brown attitudes in 2012 than there had been in 2008. Now, some of that is directly related to the national election. If you look at this research, and this is common, this has not changed ever. Well, this happens every time sociologists do it. If we take resumes and just put a name on them, like my daughter, when she starts acting a certain way, I call her Tamika. Her name's Gabrielle. And this is a little thing with us struggling with, because okay, that's another issue. But, and she gets mad when I say that, starts telling me how that's some bourgeois elitism on my part. It's a nice comeback from her. I appreciate that as the daughter of a sociologist, you know, as she then doesn't get the money she wanted for whatever she wanted that evening. But if I put the name Tamika on an application, resume rather, and an application, and then put the name, you know, Skip or Biff or whatever, or some other name, more white-sounding name, it is absolutely amazing. And we can hold all things constant, and we do it in every city, and we find the same thing. That shows me that race still matters to somebody, okay? And I'm presuming that some of those people getting those applications are liberals, and some are conservatives, and some are moderates, and it's mattering to too many of all of them. If we look at hate groups, and I don't like to spend a lot of time talking about hate groups, but the fact of the matter is they're growing. Again, some of that is in relationship to the election of President Obama, which is itself being held as the reason we're post-racial. I should be transparent and say not all of that is about race. Some of this is about attitudes toward same-sex relations. Some of its attitudes towards certain ethnic immigrant groups. And if you look at our jails, now, this is, please hear me when I say this. I'm going to show you how a sociologist thinks. The first thing a sociologist does. Sociologist goes to prisons and look at prisons and notices that a lot of them are peoples of color. Okay? They're just counting. That's 1. That's 2. That's 3. Oh, there's a white. Okay? That sociologist does that first. Then, before anything else, and I'm sure why that's important, because they're not doing what liberals do, which is to say that society institutionally is set up in a way that in the normal operations, it punishes certain groups more than others, peoples of color. It's not doing what conservatives do, which is to look and say, it's that person, moral failing, flaws in their character. In other words, it's not, the sociologist begins by not deciding if the conservatives or the liberals are right, simply noticing the what? Pattern. And the pattern is this: whether you want to blame the people or blame the culture that produced the people, either way the reality is the pattern holds. So you can't be a post-racial society if it matters either way. Does that make sense? The war on drugs. If you look at, and I'm going to get into the sentence disparities with cocaine versus, powder cocaine versus crystallized cocaine in the form of crack. I mean, probably know about that. The reality, though, is every study we do shows that black and brown people use drugs roughly proportionate to their population. But that's not the case in our jails and in our prisons. My grandfather used to say all the time that my neighborhood just got too much service. You understand what I meant by that? Mm-hmm. Okay. If you look at incarceration now, one of my colleagues at Ohio State, and I mean that no disrespect to my old student here, right. I should have flunked you when I had a chance. But instead he got 2 A's from me. So if that was 100 years ago, I probably was weakening at the point, you know. Actually, I got you both, the husband and the wife, right? Yeah. See, that's what happens when you take my class. You find a partner for life. But anyway, moving on really quickly. In terms of incarceration rates, again, this is one, I used to teach an honors class, and I'd walk in one day and they just want to read books and give me back something they read. And I'd say, stop doing that. Answer a question for me. What is patriotism? And don't talk to me about some misty-eyed inside thing. I get that. Okay, I get that. I mean, I had folks in the Twin Towers. All right, you not me to anger a person, and when something happens like that to this country, then the person standing in front of you. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about everyday patriotism. What does that mean? And they give me different answers. And I say, okay, now I'm gonna tell you what I think it should mean. It should mean that you care about Americans, and not just the Americans that look like you. That you care about Americans. So it should matter to our nation that almost 1 out of 10 African American males is at that young age are currently incarcerated. If for no other reason, if you want to do a Ayn Rand objectivist crappy thing and just say that it's in my best interest because I'm going to share a society with them. If you got to do it that way, do it that way. But I'd rather it be, you know, when President Reagan used to talk about that shining city on the top of the hill, all right, that's got to be a city with open doors to a lot of people. And you got to care about all Americans. Empty seats. You look at wealth in this country. Now, I'm around a lot of wealth now. Scott, I know you got good money.
Not as much as you.
Hey, no, why you got to get personal like that? Did I single you out in any way? Oh, I guess I did.
6 or 8 times.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on now. So that whole heparin thing is true then, I guess. Yeah, the reality is, you know, wealth is incredibly unequally distributed in our culture, and that when times are harder, the wealth gaps gets bigger. And you cannot say race does not matter. When I travel to some place, I always tell the person who picks me up, and by the way, pays me a really big check for, who arranged this, for speaking. They believe in free speech at fairs. So I always tell them, take me to the richest part of town. So if I'm in St. Louis, I go, take me to the richest part. And speaking of St. Louis, oh my goodness. I mean, you're talking that Arm & Hammer money and all that stuff. And then I say, now take me to the poorest part of town. Whatever city I go in, there's some patterns. And one of the patterns is a skin color pattern. So we can't say, now again, we can do the conservative liberal thing, but the reality is the pattern's still there. So we can't say race doesn't matter. We can say it ought not to matter, that it matters less, but we can't say it doesn't matter. Same thing with jobs. Look at the job unemployment rate. This is what I was talking about patriotism. I mean, that we tolerate poverty in this country. I mean, we just tolerate it. And it's the most amazing thing that and I don't know, a lot of you probably have traveled to a lot of countries, that one of the interesting things about America is that the poor people see the rich people. And the poor people see the upper middle class people and the middle class people. In a lot of countries, there's more distance. But in this country, you can't help but see them because they live right on the other side and you have to go around there or go by there. I was in the Holiday Inn one day. I was listening to two men talk. And I think they had money. And they had on Brooks Brothers suits. I mean, nice suits, you know, 5, 6 or whatever. They looked real good, and they were complaining. And I remember one of them, and I was listening to them. Why? I'm a sociologist, and I'm nosy. And they're talking too loud, so that makes me a part of your conversation. And one of them said to the other one, he was talking about poor people. We do so much for the poor, we, you know, whatever. And he made a statement, which was, if you can't make it in the United States, you can't make it anywhere. Now, I'm a sociologist, and I could have just said to him this. Most people in the history of the world, the entire history of the world, have died in the same social class into which they were born. Most people. The United States gives you the greatest chance to move up. But even in this country, most, I'm talking in the 90%, it's like 92, 93% of people will die in the same social class into which they were born. But he don't want to hear that. I mean, I'm not in the conversation. But when he said that, I'm thinking to myself, now upstairs, there is a poor person making a bed where he slept in last night. That's not a rich person up there making his bed. And the food that he's getting ready to eat, I'm guessing that's probably a poor or working class person who's making that food. And when he wants his car, you get where I'm going with this? And even when he wants illicit sex or something else, in all likelihood, he's going to get it from what class? The poor or the working class, okay, not the wealthy. And we take that for granted in this culture that there's this kind of like this servant class in our society. But the rest of us, we get to make these lofty declarations about why they are the way they are. And one of the core American values is individualism. And the flip side of that for us means this. You are at fault or responsible for whatever good or bad happens to you. So a Donald Trump can boast about the wonderful stuff he did with the $40 million he inherited. Okay? So he was elected or re-elected, but 45% of Republicans, and I think I get the other one, no, a quarter of all Americans, believe he wasn't even born in the U.S. Now, I am going to say this to those of you that are not sure. Hawaii is a state. It's not Illinois, and it's not Texas, but it is a state. And think how diabolic his mother was in 1960 or 61. She's thinking to herself, in a nation where blacks and whites couldn't marry in some states, and where there was rampant Jim Crow throughout southern and border states and small towns in the north, she's thinking to herself, I'm going to hook this up so he can become president. I'm going to forward some documents. You see how stupid that is? I'm going to forward some documents, and man, we're going to pull over a big one. Why not just say this? I disagree with his policies. They don't make sense to me. I disagree with this policy. I disagree with that policy. When did it become not enough to just disagree with policies? Look at the second bullet. People believing he's a Muslim. And then the third is 6% of Democrats and 20% of Republicans, 13% of the people responded believe he is the Antichrist. And I've had this conversation with Franklin. You stop, Franklin. I've had this conversation with Franklin. And this is all I'm asking people to do. 20 years from now, or 30 years from now, or 50 years from now, or whatever, when he's fishing for salmon over in someplace, I want someone to walk up to him and say, I'm sorry about that whole Antichrist thing. Okay? Short of the second coming and the apocalypse, and actually there may be a zombie apocalypse. We've had that. Yeah. But short of that happening, I want someone to apologize. Because they never apologized to Ronald Reagan for calling him the Antichrist. Never apologized to John F. Kennedy for calling him the Antichrist. Never apologized to most of these people who call the Antichrist. Can it just be enough to say we don't like your policies? Us versus them. White college students in Mississippi rioted over his re-election. And we actually had elected officials arguing that their state should secede from the Union. Didn't we have that discussion like 100 and, do the math. So us versus him. So we can't say that him being in the White House means race no longer matters when I have a whole section of the Jim Crow Museum which is dedicated to new objects that racialize in some way opposition to him. This is actually a target from Trayvon Martin. Remember that case? Whenever there's a race-based incident nationwide, brand new two-dimensional or three-dimensional objects are out there, one of Franklin's job is to find them. Do you have any problems finding them? Okay. And it's not just, if you say race matters, it matters with other groups. The number of material objects, in this case costumes, that are used to defame Mexican Americans. And we got T-shirts that say "No one," or what is it? Everyone, J-U-A-N, go home, that kind of thing. And vile anti-gay and anti-poor white people and just any number of groups where race matters. And so when you come to my home for Halloween, you just have to remember that it's trick or treat. And if you come dressed like that, which people sometimes come dressed in these ways that defame some group, then what I say to them is now you get the lecture instead of the candy. These are all new objects. Maybe we are post-racial. So these are the last things I want you to take with you. That was as quick as I could get to them. I had to cut out like 50 of the most wonderful stories you would have told your grandchildren. Your grandchildren would have told their grandchildren. Stories that would have changed America. Number one, I don't see color. Let's don't do that. That's an insult to people. What you're really trying to say is I'm not going to punish you in some way because I'm not going to mistreat you in some way. But obviously you see it, and it's okay to see it. People want to be seen. Okay. Number two, do not ignore the real disparities, and that's what I've just tried to show you. We can debate about why it is the way it is, but if I accept that I care about all Americans, then I want to find a prison system that works. And I was a criminologist. That's probably why you were taking the class, right? I was a criminologist. I was trained to be a warden, of all things. My wife's a prosecutor. In my home, you did it. Right? You're guilty. But look at the real disparities that are in our culture. And then just try to understand, why is that the way it is? And don't take the simplistic, extremely liberal, or extremely conservative answer. Number three, the idea of a post-racial nation is comforting. It enables some people to establish some distance from the past, but here's the kicker. It also allows us to ignore those inequalities I'm talking about. Because if I say to myself, we are in a post-racial society, that means race doesn't matter anymore. That means, you know what? The suffering that this group or that group is having, that's on them. It has nothing to do with me. It's nothing to do with any of us. It's all on them. Four, the term post-racial is an enemy of communication because it stops it. What it really means is we're done having that discussion. Well, could you imagine in case of men and women, if someone says, why are we still talking about men and women? Didn't we have that discussion in the 60s? Why are we still talking about that? See how ridiculous that sounds? There are some conversations we need to always have. We just have to find better ways to have them. The denial of importance of race often comes from ideas that are deeply entrenched in us or our fear, but they stop us from doing the work that we need to do. And then the final thing, and if you take nothing else from this, take this. And I hope that a lot of you can go down to the museum. I won't do a lot of talking down there. I'll let you walk around. If you have questions, you can do that. And I'm really, really proud of Ferris. We have a museum. We've been open 1 year last week. We've had over 7,000 people coming in. We had the Harvard professor, Henry Louis Gates, the one that was drinking beer with the president and the police officer. You know that story? Yeah. Yeah. Well, somebody owes me a beer too. I had to tell that story. The president doesn't invite me for a beer. But anyway, Henry Louis Gates came here and said that museum down there was, what do you call it, the most important contribution to American race history. That's a Harvard professor saying that. And not just any Harvard professor. And he shot a PBS special that's going to show up. Malak Shabazz, when Malcolm X was killed, his wife Betty Shabazz was pregnant. One of the twins that she had came to the museum, sat beneath the mural of her father, and talked about the work she's doing with the United Nations. This is Ferris State University. And we're building a collection now that deals with women. And it's going to take a while. And we're going to talk about sexism and the struggles and the like. But anyway, the last point is this right here. Instead of us pursuing a post-racial society, let's do something different. Let's pursue a post-racism society. Does that make sense? And a post-sexism society. And I think that might actually be the last slide. So, and that's just the hippie in me that wants to leave you with that. You know? So that was as quick as I could go. Is that good enough?
Perfect.
All right, good.